If today feels confusing, like your instincts are harder to trust, like something feels real but also uncertain at the same time, this isn't random. There's a distortion in how you're experiencing things right now, not necessarily in what's happening, but in how it's being interpreted. You might notice a strange mix of signals, a feeling that something is right and wrong at the same time. Clarity that doesn't fully hold. Certainty that fades when you look at it again. And that creates instability, because your system is trying to act while your perception is shifting. You may feel pulled in different directions, wanting to move forward, but unsure if it's the right move. Feeling something strongly, but questioning it just as quickly. And that back and forth can feel exhausting because there's no solid ground to stand on, just impressions, changing, adjusting, never fully settling. This is not confusion in the usual sense. It's overlap between clarity and illusion, between instinct and distortion, because today carries a rare kind of energy. Mars is now aligning with Neptune, and when these two energies meet, action and illusion mix. The part of you that wants to move connects with the part of you that blurs perception, and that creates a unique experience where you feel driven but not fully clear, motivated but not fully certain, ready to act but unsure what's actually real. That's why today can feel unstable, because your system is still active, but your perception is not fully reliable. So if something feels intense today, if something feels urgent or meaningful or emotionally charged, pause before you trust it completely. Because what feels real right now may not be as clear as it seems. What you're experiencing today is not just confusion. It's a collision of two very different forces, Mars and Neptune. Mars moves directly. It acts, it decides, it pushes forward without hesitation. Neptune does the opposite. It dissolves, it blurs, it removes clear boundaries. So when these two energies come together, you don't just feel one or the other. You feel both at the same time. The urge to act and the inability to see clearly. That's the tension. Because normally, when you feel driven, you also feel certain. And when you feel uncertain, you tend to slow down. But today, those two states overlap. You may feel a strong impulse to move, to say something, to decide something, to follow a feeling. But at the same time, your perception isn't fully stable. Things don't hold their shape. What feels right in one moment can feel unclear in the next. What seems meaningful can shift when you look at it again. And that creates distortion. Not because reality has changed, but because your ability to interpret it is less precise. Neptune doesn't remove truth. It softens your access to it. It makes everything feel more fluid, more open, but also less defined. And when Mars interacts with that, it doesn't wait for clarity to return. It acts anyway. So what you get is movement without full understanding, action without complete perception. And that's why today can feel misleading, because your system is still active, still ready to engage, still pushing you forward. But the information guiding that movement is not fully stable. You may also notice that emotions feel amplified, not necessarily stronger, but more influential. They shape how you interpret things. They color your perception. And because Neptune is involved, those emotional signals can feel meaningful, almost like intuition, but not all of them are. That's the key distinction today. Not everything that feels intuitive is actually guidance. Some of it is projection. Some of it is imagination.
Some of it is your system trying to make sense of something that isn't fully clear yet. So what you're experiencing is not a loss of direction. It's a temporary distortion in how you perceive that direction. And when you recognize that, you stop trying to force clarity and start navigating with awareness instead.
This is where the distortion becomes difficult to recognize. Because what you feel today doesn't feel false. It feels real, convincing, meaningful, important. And that's what makes this energy so subtle. You might feel like you're gaining insight, seeing something deeper, understanding something you didn't notice before, picking up on signals that feel significant. And some of that may be true, but not all of it. That's the first trap. Assuming that intensity equals accuracy. Because when perception becomes fluid, your mind fills in the gaps. It creates meaning. It connects dots. It builds interpretations. And those interpretations can feel correct, even when they aren't grounded. You might start reading into situations more than usual, interpreting tone, assigning intention, drawing conclusions based on incomplete information. And because your awareness is heightened, those conclusions can feel precise. But precision is not the same as clarity. The second trap is false intuition. Today, intuition and imagination can feel very similar. Both come as signals. Both feel internal. Both seem to point you in a direction, but they don't come from the same place. True intuition is steady. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't push you into immediate action. It remains consistent even when you pause. False intuition is reactive. It feels urgent, emotionally charged, like something you need to follow right now. And that urgency is often the signal that it's not fully aligned. The third trap is acting on incomplete perception. Because Mars is still active, the drive to move, to decide, to take action has not disappeared. So you may feel pulled to act based on what you're sensing, to respond to a feeling, to follow an impression, to make a decision based on what seems real in the moment. But if that perception is distorted, the action becomes misaligned. Not necessarily wrong, but disconnected from what's actually true. And that creates confusion later. Not immediately, but once clarity begins to return. So the real calibration today is restraint, not in your energy, but in your interpretation. You don't need to shut down what you feel. You just need to stop assigning immediate meaning to it. Let the feeling exist without turning it into a conclusion. Let the thought arise without turning it into a decision. Because what is actually true will still be true later, but what is distortion will shift the moment you stop feeding it. And that's how you begin to separate what is real from what only feels real right now. So how do you move through a day like this, when your perception feels active but not fully reliable? You don't shut down your awareness. You slow down your conclusions. Because what you're sensing is not the problem. It's how quickly you interpret it. So instead of asking, "What does this mean?" shift the question. What is actually confirmed? Stay with what is clear, what is observable, what does not change when you look at it again. Because reality today is more stable than your interpretation of it. And when you anchor yourself there, everything begins to settle. You can also reduce your reaction speed, not by stopping movement completely, but by inserting space before response. If something feels urgent, wait. If something feels emotionally charged, pause. If something feels like it needs an immediate decision, give it time. Because urgency today is not a reliable signal. What is real will remain steady, even if you don't act on it right away.
But what is distortion often shifts when you give it space. You can also bring your awareness back into your body, because when perception becomes fluid, your mind becomes less stable, and your body becomes your anchor. Simple grounding helps, slowing your breathing, noticing physical sensations, focusing on what is tangible and present. This reconnects you to something that is not shifting, something that is not interpretive. And from there, your awareness becomes clearer, not because everything makes sense, but because you are less influenced by distortion. You may also find that doing less today creates more clarity, not in a passive way, but in a controlled way. Limit unnecessary decisions. Avoid reacting to every signal. Let things unfold without interference, because this energy is temporary and clarity will return. But what you do during this phase determines how much correction you'll need later. So today is not about acting quickly. It's about moving carefully, not based on what feels intense, but based on what remains consistent, because consistency is the closest thing to truth you have access to right now.
Let everything slow down here. Not to remove what you felt today, but to separate what is real from what only felt real in the moment. Because today was not about clarity. It was about showing you how easily perception can shift, and how quickly meaning can be created when things are not fully defined. So take a breath, steady, controlled, unforced, and notice what remains when you're not trying to interpret anything. There's still awareness here, even if it feels quieter, even if it feels less certain, it's still present. And from this place, you can begin to see more clearly. Not everything that felt important today needs to be carried forward. Not every thought needs to become a conclusion. Not every feeling needs to turn into action. Some of it was temporary, a result of perception shifting faster than clarity could stabilize. So you don't need to correct everything. You don't need to undo anything. You just need to allow things to settle. Because clarity returns on its own, not through force, not through overthinking, but through stillness, through giving your awareness time to realign. And when it does, what is true becomes easier to recognize again. Not louder, but more consistent, more stable, more grounded. So as you move forward from here, you don't need to rush into decisions. You don't need to trust every impulse. You don't need to define everything right now. You just need to stay aware without reacting immediately, and let clarity rebuild at its own pace. Because what is real will still be real later, and what is not will fade without needing your attention. And if this helped you stay grounded even slightly, keep that with you. Return to it when things begin to feel unclear again. And if you want to keep moving through these shifts with more awareness, more control, you can come back here each day, not to find certainty, but to stay aligned even when clarity is not immediate.